Right, good afternoon. I seem to be the night watchman for the next, CPD? So, yeah, right. Okay, my name is Winsbert Felix. I'm a chartered quantity surveyor. I've been asked to speak on quantities and management. But before I start, I just want to alert you about a few things that's happening in the world as it will impact price and cost. The US inflation rate now stands at 8.6%, the UK 9.1%, Canada 7.7%. Why am I telling you that? Because most of the components going into your building would have been imported from one of these countries. As a result, we live on an island. So again, the price of fuel has gone up and continues to go up because of the war. So the knock-on effect is the overall cost of the components that goes within the building structure. It's a rather unknown factor because when you start the construction, or should I say when you start the bid to commence a project, over the life cycle of that project, the cost or the pricing mechanism will fluctuate. As a small contractor, you need to be aware of such because you're in this to make money. It fluctuates. I will show you how it can fluctuate. You see, this is why I'm going to tell you some of the strategies that you perhaps need to adopt to recognize that. Okay. Yeah. Okay, I was asked to speak about rate development, material procurement, contract extras, and balanced finances. Now, your rate development, very often I get a call and people ask me, what's the rate for X, Y, and Z? Concrete. I'm building a house 10 by 12, give me a rate. My response to that, I don't have a rate. Every single aspect of construction, you have to ascertain what goes into that process. Okay, for example, you may decide to reduce your profit margins because you maintain your turnover. You may decide you want to increase your profit margin because you have too much work and you're not interested in that job. But if they continue to pester you and you want to do it, fine, they pay a premium. The other aspect is in terms of where that work is being erected. Is it below the hill or above the hill? Would you require a pumping mechanism? Would you require double handling, etc.? And all these things you have to take all that into consideration before you could come up with a rate that you would actually carry out a project and make a profit. Or if you're working for a charity, do it for them and then you pay for it. So rate development, basically, I would simplify it by saying it's an all-inclusive cost against a unit of measurement. Whether it be, before I go into that, and rates are generated from the method of measurement to be applied on that particular project and the conditions of contract. For example, when you price for excavation, there is working space. So I think Mr. Port alluded to that this morning when he was talking about the profile boards and the working space of 1 meter. You may be required to have additional space because of the equipment that will be maneuvering in there. But when the quantity surveyor measures the work, he's only going to measure it net in accordance to the method of measurement. So you in your pricing will make allowances for that extra excavation to accommodate your working space. The rates can be expressed in terms of a meter, cost per meter square, meter cube. It could be based on the number of windows, doors, or somebody just put a global description and itemize that component, or it could be something that's provisional and you can put it in terms of a sum. You can obtain a rate from the suppliers. For example, your concrete guy would sell your concrete maybe for something a cubic meter, or you can develop a rate from first principle. By that, I mean the cost of the bag of cement, your sand, your aggregate, your water, the man who's going to mix it or your mixer. Then you put an allowance for wastage. Then there's an allowance for your profits, your overheads, etc. And then you could come across with a unit rate. You could also get rates from historical data. Let's say you built a house next door and the cost of the concrete was $350. So you can apply that rate because you worked with it before and you know, and then you can make the adjustments against that. Or you can get it from price books. There are some publishers who would identify costs of various units and you can use that. Or you can just plug from there and just put something against it, you know, and that's it. And sometimes that works. General statements. You apply a rate against a quantity to get a cost. Okay. And of course, that would inform your bid or your project budget. I've tried to come up with a typical work example. A client requires a floor to be poured comprising of 20 cubic meters of concrete. He goes to the contractor goes to the supplier, John Brown Limited. The concrete is being sold at $450 a cubic meter. If you express that in terms of the quantity required, that would work out to about $9,000. The contractor requires 4 hours to pour that slab. He employs 2 masons and 2 helpers. The combined rate, I think, is about $150 per day, and I think it's about $450. It's $225 for the 4 hours, but $450 for the day. Can any one of you tell me at what rate you think the contractor should price that job to make a profit of 15% that was described? Just take a guess. He bought the concrete at $450. His labor per day was at $450, and you work it down to the unit of 20 cubic meters. All right, I suspect you're a bit tired, so let's move on. So in working it out, you take the cost of the concrete, which is a material component of it. I did not include wastage because the supplier would have already paid for the wastage from the supplier's cost. The labor cost, 2 masons, $150 a day, 300 2 laborers, 75, 150. The combined rates, divide that, you get an hourly rate. And of course, the cost for the 4 hours of pouring the concrete. But normally, when guys pour concrete, don't pay them half, you pay them the full day. So it works out to about $450. The plant, which is a vibrator, at $120 for the day. If you look at the cost summary, the material, the labor, the plant, you add his profit and overheads, it works out overall cost of $11,000. In essence, for him to make or to realize a return of 15% on that, you would have to price that concrete at $550 per cubic meter. The reality is, like I said, he could have priced it, I think, about $475. If you have no interest in making a profit, but just to keep his men going, he could have priced it at that. You need to recognize when within your rate, typical wastage allowances would range between 10 and 25%. Somebody tell me why 25%? If you ever try putting on diagonal tiles, you must make an allowance of 25% wastage for diagonal tiles. Otherwise, you will not be able to complete that flooring. Material procurement. In most instances, again, I mentioned earlier on about the inflation, the cost of fuel. As a contractor, material procurement, you have to be very prudent about that. And you cannot acquire too much material and store it on site. There's a risk of theft. And at the same time, you do not want to tie up your cash flow, which is very critical. So one of the main objectives of materials procurement is to select the materials. It's to also help you to place your orders. You know the exact quantity, you know your budget, etc. You can raise an invoice, and then you can pay for your materials so that you have a record of that. And the reason for that, when you look at the other section, which is contract actuals, you recognize the significance of records. It also allows you to facilitate the delivery of materials to site. So if you procure the materials, you know exactly what is coming and what you're short, and whether you have to look for alternatives or again, consult with your consultants so that they can help rectify a problem. It also helps you to facilitate the incorporation of materials in the final building product. So you know exactly what's going there and you have it in store, or you know where it's available. Some of the key considerations is the availability of the materials and the prices of the materials. That the prices, for one, will impact your profit margin. Most instances, people, or should I say small contractors, engage clients, they come up with a price, and sometimes they do not take into consideration all that is required for that particular job. And they figure once they're in, they will come back and say, well, I have another bill for you, et cetera, et cetera. And the client said, but I thought we had settled that, and said, no, it's required. So the other issue again is that when they price the job and the prices goes up, they recognize that they will have a loss, and they go to the client and say, well, you know, it's costing me X, Y, and Z. Now that's the risk in construction. You take that risk, you could either make a profit or you could make a loss, but you have to adequately calculate that risk. The other situation is the logistic implication. We live on an island. Everything that comes into the construction process, in fact, most of it is imported. So you need to know what goes in, you need to know what price, and to ensure that it is available just in time so that you can incorporate within the building. The other thing to note is your storage capacity. If you have a restricted site, that might be an issue. So the materials have to be delivered just in time. And or else you risk double handling. You may have to put it in a bonded warehouse and then bring it to the site. Now, all of that is very important to note when pricing that project. Double handling, storage, additional storage space, etc. Again, like I mentioned, site constraints. Now, one of the ways in terms of procurement to save yourself some money is whether you can do bulk purchase. Right now, it's very difficult to get a discount on anything, lumber, steel, whatever, no discount. So the only way you can get around creating some savings, if you have that capacity, is bulk purchase. Earlier on, we heard about people ordering materials. I can tell you from experience, even when you go to the source in China, there are three different standards. There's the local standard, there's the European standard, and the standards for the Americans. So most times when the Chinese compete with you and they build products in your country, they would come in at a very cheap rate, but what is incorporated is what was supposed to be for the domestic standards. I've had to go down to China and actually get somebody to look at the certification process. So to ensure that the materials that we require to get into our project is up to the required European standards or American standards that we require. In St. Lucia, again, it brings us back to our building code and our standards. If we have an effective building code and standards, it means to say that our suppliers would not be allowed to bring in inferior products that could be incorporated into our buildings. The other thing, again, like I said, cash flow. You do not want to purchase a large quantity of materials and then you have no money to pay for your labor and other things like that. So within the process, you must look at your cash flow allocation for that particular project. Inflation, again, is something. In some contracts, there are inflation components. Your typical housing contracts do not have any inflation component. As a matter of fact, we do not really have a housing contract in St. Lucia. Most housing contracts are bespoke contracts. They are designed by maybe a lawyer, an accountant, somebody who put something together with very onerous conditions, whether in favor of the contractor or the client. There's something called the contract preferential rule. Whoever construct that contract, be aware that you will not necessarily get the protection of that contract. It's the other party. Also, we do not have the unfair contract terms in our legal space. So be aware of your contract requirements when you prepare to price it. And even though the contract is rather onerous, there's a way around it is in terms of how you present your rates so that you can take care of that risk in the event that a situation arises. The other thing to note again is your project program. That's very critical in terms of you getting your materials onto the site. For example, you start off with your foundations. You need to have your concrete, your steel. So that would be the first thing that you need to procure, your concrete and your steel to get you off the ground and your block wood. And your program would guide you in terms of how you can expend on the budget. The budget is also key, right? If you have an allocation of $10 to buy concrete and you go and you purchase concrete at $15, automatically you're at a loss of $5. At the same time, if you have an allocation of $10, you should not go and buy concrete for $5 and then minimize the specifications. You should never compromise the quality. You're guided by the specifications and whatever is within the conditions of contracts. Okay, so your budget must reflect what's in that contract document. In some contract documents, you would have like nominated suppliers or named suppliers. And that will have a constraint because you cannot go and get an alternative supplier. And for example, we had dormers here. So if the architect specified dormers windows, you cannot say, okay, I'll put another window on because dormers is too expensive and I can't afford it. You should have price, you should have contacted dormers, get a price from them, put your markup, and then incorporate within your budget. Now, that takes me on to contract extras. There's an assumption that contractors are entitled to extras. There's an assumption by clients that they are entitled to extras. But the determination of that is based on the contract authority. Okay, you can vary the contract by adding or omitting. You can revise the specification. But the critical thing is to note the net effect. Is it going to cost me more, or is it going to cost me less, or it has no financial effect? So some of the things that create contract extras are design modifications. The client, there's a point in a project where you have what is known as a design freeze. So that set of document goes out to tender, and it is priced by you, contractors, and that price is accepted by the client as being the budget. But throughout the execution of the works, there will be some alteration. The client might say, you know, I went by my friend and I saw she had a nice cupboard looking like this, and I want that. Okay, fine, but have you considered the cost implication? Most instances, they do not consider cost implication. Then a contractor like you, if is very shrewd or commercially astute, should I say, will say, yeah, that's a very interesting design. And you may either she may say to you, okay, proceed. But before you proceed, you must first and foremost identify what is the cost effect. So at the end of the day, there will be no arguments between the client and the contractor. In most instances, there's argument because you never firm up that particular decision before moving forward. You may have changes in quality and quantity of the work. Again, look at the financial effects. Sometimes it may be an increase, it may be a decrease, or it could just be a zero cost effect. Specification changes. I've come into situations where, you meet contractors and probably they worked on a job somewhere and they saw something and they decide, what the architect specifies is not correct and they want to do their own thing and they change the specs on their own without any instructions or consultation. That's a very dangerous thing to do. I've always said to people, if I am the contract administrator, I'll ask you to take it out at your own cost and do exactly what I ask you to do or what was specified. So you do not play with these things because the designer may have done his calculations, whether in terms of strength, and the architect may have looked at the aesthetics of that particular material. And there's a reason why he wants that material in. So not because Tom Jones had it on his house and you figure that, please, is it a Calypsonian who says stay in your section? Do what your role is to build, and that's what you should do. Do not change the specification unless you have been asked to. There could be, again, changing design, scope by the owner. I spoke about that. There's also situations where you will find errors or omissions. Now, the designers do not know it all. And in some instances, in fact, in the bigger countries where you have more specialist contractors, most times you get an outline design and it's left to the contractor to fill in the details or the specialist to fill in the details. There could also be a genuine error. I could recall once doing a hotel, and then there were some villas that we had to construct. And when I went through the drawings, I recognized the roof would have caved in. And I was told, and I brought it to their attention. I said, I'm not doing this because you're going to kill people. And the project manager at the time said to me, boy, this was designed by the top engineer in the Caribbean. I said, yeah, but he's going to kill people. After they reviewed my concerns, then he came and said, boy, you're right. The guy saw that and it was found out that that design was not done by the engineer. It was done by his nephew working in his practice. So sometimes you will have these things happening. When you see an error and omission, it's not there for you to embarrass the designer, etc., but you to just point it out to them, oversight, and there's discussion, and in collaboration, you can rectify that and move forward. There could be conflicts between contract documents. Again, you may have a specification on the drawing and one within the specification document. Clarification would be required. Do not go in and put one in, and then after you say, it makes no sense. You create an adversarial climate, and construction will not proceed in a very good way if you have that kind of climate. The other issue, sometimes back to inadequate working drawings or details. Many small contractors, no disrespect to you, may have emerged from working with somebody else. So if you're familiar with a particular detail, you may think that's the only way forward. But if you are trained and you have, there are various options that to be applied in a given situation. And, but sometimes some of details may not be appropriate. They might be inadequate. It's always good to, if again, your experience, it counts, to have a discussion and seek clarification from the contract administrator. I think. It's frozen. Another big issue is lack of coordination by consultants. So it's not all the time the problem is with the contractors. Some consultants are not tardy, you may ask for information, and you may have that problem. Another thing is poor planning by the contractors. If most persons building a residential house may probably not have a program. So today they decide we point the slab, we point to this, we point to that. But the time given to the client to complete the project at the back of the client's mind, I'm moving into my house on the 15th of that particular month. But when that time frame comes in, you're like, well, we're missing the windows and we couldn't get that. And again, it comes back to your planning. There's the other situation that could give rise to an increased cost, which is the weather conditions. If you have a hurricane or a storm, it may impact your site. There's always the insurance provision to take care of that. Some people, they take a risk. I always call the way I see the construction industry operating in St. Lucia as try a thing. Everybody trying a thing. And if they get away, fine. But in terms of structure and organization, we have a long way to go. But the beauty about these things is, you see what's happening now? With the high inflation and market forces, it regularizes the marketplace. So if you're well prepared, you'll survive. If you're not, you'll fall by the wayside. Another thing, which is the unforeseen site conditions. In most instances, I don't know how many people know that, based on our soil type, we have a predominantly clay soil type in St. Lucia. And what happens in the dry period, the soil contracts. When it rains, it expands. If you go around Groseley, the Mon area right now, and persons who have not basically concrete around their buildings, you see it's cracking. You see the soil cracking, all sorts of indications to their foundation. But when you get onto the site, again, if you start construction in the rainy period, the sides of your excavation may collapse. You may have double handling and stuff like that, or you may encounter soft spots in the soil, and you may have to go deeper. So these things will come in, and with the absence of soil reports, etc. Another thing which I find very amazing is the poor interpretation of drawing requirements by contractors. One of the key things, and I'm hoping maybe the Institute of Architects could take that as another training session, is to teach contractors how to read the drawings. In most instances, this is not funny. Just last week, I have a guy they're doing a project, and I'm looking at the project, and when I went to inspect, in terms of the width of the foundation, there was a retaining wall, it had a tool, they had made no allowance for the tool, and of course, looking at the steel. So you have to look at all these things, but it's on the drawing. And of course, they said, oh, I didn't see that, but it's right there. So that's very important, that you can understand what you're working with. I think most small contractors depend on a technician. And in the absence of having a technician on site, these issues will evolve. What are the impacts of contract extras? I think everyone is familiar with that term, cost overruns. And what that simply means is that you have exceeded your budget allocation. There's also, you can never have cost overruns without time overruns. That means the project will not finish on time. And any project in St. Lucia you see that was supposed to have been completed within a year, within 1 year, that was the project time frame, and then a year and a half, and they tell you it's done within budget, that's a lie. That can never happen, okay? Whether it's highly inflated or whatever, the two always coincide. Another thing to note is whenever there are contract extras and people go beyond the budget, quality sometimes, it's very easy to come at the back of one mind, I'll get a substitute component to put in there to get, so that I can withstand the pressures of the budget. In other instances, you may find yourself doing work twice as a contractor. If you don't do it properly, you may have to go back the contract administrator may ask you to bring it up and do it again. That will impact your productivity. And the next thing that will come out of that, there will be disputes, because anybody who's losing money tend to get angry. It's a fact. And after that, there comes a reputational damage. The client will no longer want to recommend you to another client. And we live in a small space. Everybody knows everybody, and you would not want that to impact your long-term performance. Now, how do you recover costs, contract extras? It's very easy to say, I did more work and I'm not getting paid for it, but how are you going to substantiate that? In most instances, small contractors, they walk with a bag in their van, and that's their form, that's their office, that's their records. I'm not saying that to bash you. All I'm saying to you is that if you want to succeed and you want to progress in this particular industry, you need to be more structured and organized. And the reason for that is every time you're going to fight a claim, you need to substantiate. You need to submit the evidence. Your word against his word means nothing. There's a part that hearsay can be accepted, but the truth is, it's a very difficult burden trying to verify the hearsay. Okay? So your project records must be in good order. Some contracts may not specify. Some contracts may not specify the form of record keeping, but it's always advisable to maintain records. And the main reason for that, in terms of retroactive claims, like you want to go back, for example, the client will tell you, go ahead and cast that step for me. You say, okay, fine, you go ahead and you do it. But there's not an architect instruction. You have not confirmed that verbal instruction by writing to a further conversation to cast that step, and you give your particulars. There's none of that information available. So when it goes before the courts or before a mediator, arbitrator, whatever, any form of dispute resolution, you need to find ways and means to substantiate what was the intent of the parties. That is very critical. So just to give you an idea, some of the records that I think that you should maintain on your project is, one is your program. So you could identify when you started and when you were intended to complete. And then you could identify any changes within that program, okay? The other thing is to identify the level of progress you've made at any point in time within that project. Another form of records is the correspondence between yourself and the client and the consultants. You also need to record the resources you have on site in terms of men, plant, equipment, and also your cost records, your invoices, materials that you've paid for, and things that you're owed. If the client owe you, how you call that, an interim payment, so you can identify what amount of money you've drawn down on that particular project. And also there's your administrative records for your NIS, income tax purposes, etc. There's also records for payments, so you can see how much you've actually paid your workers, and your contract and tender documents, because any changes along the way throughout the execution of the project, you should be able to match that against what you were required to do from inception. And if there are any diversions from that, whether from the consultant. Now, a critical point that came earlier on is that in home building contracts, most instances, the client eliminate the consultant. So there's no architect, it's just an arrangement between a client and a contractor. And then the instructions are given, and in some instances, the client may just express their desire, not recognizing the technical implications or the cost implications. They'll tell you, expand. I'll give an example where somebody went and they expanded the building by a foot. And they thought we're just making the floor a little wider, but they never take into consideration that they're impacting the floors above and the roof above. And that cost figure, if it was like 1 million, they've just added $300,000 on that original budget. But they still expect the whole building to be completed for the $1 million. So these things, so the only way we can track that is to identify what was your original drawing outline and to identify what is the as-built component of it. And that's how you can track the extras. I'm going to make a few general statements. Contract extras must be substantiated against the base document, which is your contract document or a particular event. You would require good records, and you should maintain your records. And they state what you plan to do and what you actually did. They should be updated whenever there are changes, and they should be organized and structured. In working on multi-million or billion-dollar projects, I've had a situation where $1 billion pounds, and the records for that going into dispute is only containing 15 leverage files. That's a recommendation. And it's £1 billion, 15 leverage files. But it had to be structured, and all the claims had to be, you zone in on the claims to get a speedy resolution. So again, if you're well structured and organized, normally when I deal with contractors and we come to final account, my system is simple. You put it out, as soon as you come with one, I go bam, 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 bam. That's it. I don't give you an opportunity to come tell me, well, no. This is what it is, this is that, bam, bam, bam. And that's it, we conclude. Not keeping records can be a very expensive mistake, because then you have to employ maybe somebody like me or your lawyers or somebody like that to substantiate your claims. And you could have done that by just keeping your records in an organized format, and then you can substantiate your claims. Okay. Balanced finances. What do we mean by that? Basically, you're given, you tender for a project, there is a contract sum, which is your budget. You look at each project and say, on that project, I'm going to make 15, 10, 5% margins. You know what you want to make on that. So when I'm working in a commercial management capacity, I extract my profit on every job. That's the first thing. That money, it's gone. It's not going into the project. So I have my cost and my sales. So based on my cash flow projection, so at every quarter within the project, I know we'll be expending X amount of dollars or pounds, whatever, on that project. And I know I'm expecting X amount based on the level of work that is executed on that program. So at any point in time, I could tell you where we are, how much money we're going to spend, how much money we're going to get based on these parameters. So your monthly spend will equal to your project budget divided by your program. That's simple. And then your program, which is your project duration. Your cost, I'm looking at, which is your project budget. So if you have, most times I hear contractors saying, well, I get $1 million project, and they think that they're $1 million rich. The truth is that you're not $1 million richer. You must do the analysis to look at what is your cost and your sales component, and then you extract your profits. That's when, because $1 million you think that you've gotten, may have actually put you in $1 million in debt because of the risk component of the project. But you must do a cost and sale analysis, so then you can see. So your cost, which is your project budget, your sales, I'm looking at your cost of materials, labor, variation, plant and equipment. And then you look at your profit margin would be your cost minus your sales. And that would basically determine, in terms of finance, you must balance that component. And again, you may decide, I'm just there for the turnover, like now when things are very difficult. People just want to know that they're working. So your margins will come down and you have to, but that is a commercial decision that you have to make within your organization. Right. You know, I'm often fascinated by our construction industry in St. Lucia. Because because our industry is so wide open, standards means different things to different individuals. Standards are not enforced. So everybody has an opinion of what should be done. And I always like this little presentation, which is what a client wanted. The perception of an architect who wants to make it the client wanted a swing on the branch. The architect figure, you know, it would be better if you put the swing against the stem. It will look, you know, give the tree a better presentation, the aesthetics. The QS or the estimator figured that, you know, the swing had too many, should I say, braces, so they decided to use one and eliminate the seating because it was too expensive. The engineer figured this thing is not stable, so he recognized putting additional braces. The planning department realized that the swing is going to be blocking the space, so he took off the seating and allowed the rope to be freestanding. The building inspector was so concerned about safety, recognized, well, you know what, we need to add some anchors to that swing. And then the fire department, all that they could see is that swing, in case of a fire, it will not exist. The environmentalists figured that we were doing damage to the tree, so he decided that he's going to take away that seating component and leave the tree freestanding. And the supplier, all that he could see is add on more seating, that could increase his profits. The builder, well, he figured that he can do the architecture, he can do the engineering, he can do the QSing, so he adds a bit of everything, you know. So that is the kind of thinking that's within our industry today. Without everybody recognizing that they have a specialist skill set, and if they only stay within that component, we can have a better industry, functioning industry that is disciplined. Today, sad to say, I see all sorts of things happening, and I'm happy that the Institute of Architects have taken the initiative and organized such training sessions. I was hoping to see more persons attending, because I think if we continue on that particular mode, we can improve our industry to have professional builders and practitioners. Now, okay, you might be asking, when will this thing end? I'll say to you soon. On that basis, I'll say thank you for your time and effort. I'll pass on to Jamal.
Thank you, Winsbert. Let me just tell you, I took great offense to that reference, to that depiction of how architects would have designed that swinger. Architecture is about functionality. Right. Yeah, so I'm not sure if there are any questions. I mean, I have a couple of points I would like to bring up as it comes out of Winsbert's presentation, you know, some things to keep in mind. Material procurement. Always check specifications on your drawings, all right? Not because you have to buy a lock means there's any lock you can buy. So don't price for just any lock. Make sure you check, see what kind of locks the project requires, because you go and buy something by M&C and then they tell you, well, no boy, it was, you know, $1,000 a lock for what's required. So you've lost money there. Especially when you're dealing with small clients and on projects that don't have, you know, detailed drawings. Finalize things with clients. If you are responsible for purchasing materials, make sure your finished materials are decided with the client. You know, find out if it's ceramic tile they're going to be having, or if it's porcelain, you know, or if it's marble they want. Okay, because I mean, big differences in the pricing. So make sure you specify and get things in writing, as Winsbert said. Any changes they make, the stair was 5 feet, they decide no, they want it at 6 feet. write that down, make them sign it, make them understand that your price for that stay was this. Changing it to 6 feet will now make it this much. You're gonna owe me this much at the end, because they're not gonna remember that they specifically asked you for that. All right, or they'll say they don't remember. So just protect yourselves. Make sure you have everything in writing. Check on your long lead items. All right, things that you may not be able to get down here that's specified in the drawing or that the client wants. You may have to do a bit more planning to make sure that you have those things available when you need them. On rain, force majeure, boy, I could give you all a story about how projects can be affected by the weather. All right. When I was building, I was overseeing my works myself, and we set up our forms to cast the upper slab. And the day we finished and we were getting ready to cast the following day, rain started. It literally rained every single day for almost 2 weeks. That was the year before. Almost 2 weeks straight, my formwork sat down there getting rain. So much so that the formwork actually started to warp. You understand? Now, these things are costs that somebody else take care of. I mean, good thing it was me doing my thing, so I didn't have anyone to quarrel with. But these are things that happen, Now, I mean, these things are usually covered in contracts. So whenever you have acts of God, major hurricanes, I think these things are covered. But simple things like that, something that will, delay you a week, might have other cost implications. So you have to, I suppose sometimes you just have to make sure you have extra in there for that, especially if you're building in the rainy season, and make sure you have that weather app on your phone, boy. Right? Keep track of that. And drawings. Read all drawings, not just structural drawings. Most contractors, you find you on site where the elevations, they don't even know where the elevation drawings are. That's in the back of the truck somewhere, because they have the structural drawings. It shows them the column, the slab, the beams. They're good with that. They figure they look at architectural drawings when you start to put in windows and things. No, architectural drawings show you what level your floor should be at. And remember, architectural drawings will show you your finished floor level. All right, the structural drawings will usually just show you your slab and your beams, but that doesn't tell you if you have a screed on top of that and then you have your tiles. All of that's gonna affect the height of your door frames, because if you just cast it to the level of the structural concrete, and then you come in and you put in your door openings to your regular height. When you come back now and you have to screed your floor and put in your tiling, all of a sudden your door frame, your door opening is too short. So check all of your drawings, read all of your drawings, keep all of your drawings on site, and make sure that, as he said, that somebody that can read them properly. All right. I don't know if there are any other questions from online. If anyone in the room had any questions. See anything there, Alden? No? Okay, we have one question in house.
It was a very good point. A lot of the time, clients don't understand what the building looks like just from the drawings. So it's when the walls start going up and they now start to feel the room, and they say, "Oh, is there a thing going?" But I thought was there, and then now the changes start to going, and of course that goes into a greater cost and greater time. I don't know why, but maybe I'm just unlucky, but I have yet to be on a project that falls within
budget
and within or under time.
Yeah.
They always seem to go over, and it always seems to catch the bank, it always seems to catch the engineer, it always seems to catch everybody by surprise.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that has to do with a lot of things. So for those online, his comment was that, clients generally can't picture a building as it will be finished. So as it starts to go up, when they start to see things constructed a certain way, that's when they realize, boy, that's not how I thought it would look. Especially if they weren't presented with full 3D renders and things. Most clients can't read plans, so it's a valid point that as the house is being built, they would realize that things are not going up how they wanted. So that's fine, but that has to be taken into account in any changes that are being made. Even if they just want you to move a window across, that could have implications on your electrical lines that are already there, etc., etc. So, there is a valid point that the client may have good reason for wanting to move things, but just take care of yourself with that. He also made the point that he hasn't been on any project yet that has finished under budget and under time, etc. A lot of projects finish over budget. A lot of it has to do with contractors as well coming in at a competitive price because they want to get the job. They figure once they get the job, they can find a way to make money off of it anyway. So they'll come in at a certain price for the client, and the client cry for them and tell them, boy, that hot, what you can do, and they cut it down because they want to get the job. Now, as he said, sometimes you have to make the business decision. Boy, I just want to make sure I have work to pay my guys to keep business moving. But you have to keep in mind, even if you're doing that you may lose money on certain things in the project. So even if you think you're just doing this to keep the business open, make sure you have enough in there for contingency, because you may actually end up putting the business under by bidding so low. So I mean, that's one thing. Another thing is lack of specifications. When somebody basically gets a draftsman to just design a house for them to get approval, it's approved. Approved drawings don't have enough detail for you to price properly for a job. All right? Approved drawings don't even have window and door schedules. Okay? Or that is not required. You can submit it if you want, but almost no one does. So even like hardware schedules, all these sort of things, if you need stainless steel hinges, you need all of this information in your construction drawings. And a majority of people do not have all of that information in their drawings. So it's difficult for a contractor to price properly for a project. Most of them will just go by a square foot and work off of that. And most of the time, again, the finishes weren't taken into account properly because the client want, some nice big 24 by 24 tiles, or maybe even 48 by 24. And that wasn't taken into the budget, Then you have, of course, inflation. Now, Winsworth did say, when you're costing, you can do it. What was your term? By historical data? Yeah. So I think the historical data is the one I was referring to. In this time, you can't base anything on historical data, sorry. You could have built a house 4 or 5 months ago. Don't price the next one you get there at the same cost at all. All right? Even the QSs. A lot of QSs I find are not updating their rates enough. Okay? You have to be calling we have a guy in-house by us. Every single time we price something, he has to call every single supplier on island. All right? We don't use any rates that we have in-house. Every single project, we call around and we verify prices because the prices are changing all the time. It's not just the war, it's everything. All right? I actually think it's just a conspiracy and people just want to make money. But yeah, but I mean, it's a serious matter, and it's something that you can't take for granted. When you're pricing a job, it's a scary time to be a contractor. So it's either you price high and make sure that you're comfortable, or you're very accurate with your pricing and you're very good with your planning. All right, that's pretty much the only way to make it in the contracting industry right now, boy. Yes, sir. Mm.
I just wanted to speak to the more pricing prices. Contracts maybe that could have been priced not a year ago. What is sort of your advice?
Okay, so the question for those online is, with contracts that were priced probably last year, you know? How do you deal with that, considering? Huh? Yeah, come. Yeah, so no, just repeating the question for those online. Basically, so how do you handle those contracts that have been priced from last year?
Right. Before me giving you the secret of the trade, but I'll tell you. All right. Most times, you would update your pricing model based on taking into consideration inflation. So there are various formulas you can apply. I gave you the figures: 8%, 9%, etc. Just a simple one. I have done projects back in 2020. And I've been asked again to revise those costs in 2022. There was a time I did a project in 2015, and I had to do what is called an economic analysis, look at the implication of the fuel price adjustments, shipping costs. Let me just give you an example of what has happened. Before, there's a ship that would sail from California to China, and that ship, 2 years ago, it would cost you $8,250 to, hire that ship. Today, it's costing you $60,000 to hire that ship to make that trip. So there's a significant cost there. The cost of shipping a 20-foot container before used to be about 4,000 US. It moved to 13,000. It has now come down to 12,500 US. So there are ways and means to adjust your cost by applying an inflation index against it. For some of the projects I have done here, it could range to, in some instances, you have seen cost increases ranging between 20 and 30% increases in cost. And that's talking about some major projects and stuff like that. I'm in the process. In fact, I should have done it before I come here because but I did not do it. But I normally track over a series of years because we adjust our fuel cost. And the reason for that, most of our suppliers adjust their pricing based on fuel costs, but also the price in the source market. If inflation at 8.1%, you can basically double that. It's already 16 from the source market. And then when you bring it down there based on the shipping costs and you add a factor to that. So you can see how the number is going up. The other issue to note, whilst inflation is going up, I'll touch on two other things. Whilst inflation is going up, you have the local component. Workers now are starting to feel the squeeze and they're starting to demand an increase in their rates. There's that. We also have a social issue where there's starting to be no-go zone areas in St. Lucia. Even as a contractor, very soon you'll have to start paying what we call badman fees. It's happening in Jamaica. When you build in certain parts, you have to pay a fee to certain persons to get in there. So all these things are creeping into our economy, in our society, and these are nothing new. They're being done out there. So price, and in Jamaica, when you put your pricing in the document on the watching and lighting, you have to pay a fee to the local don. So that is another thing that you will not see it in the contract rates, but these things will come up. So like,
construction discussion that is happening on the contract. For example, building materials, steel company just raise the prices every other week.
Yeah.
And there seems not to be any action. So I think even from all the institutions, but I think most specifically from the surveyors, I just think that discussion is big. We need to do it because the prices of everything is, how real it is, there's no indication of the cost of the building is changing. I think we need to address it and have a discussion with government because The guys are suffering.
Well, on the major projects, I could tell you major projects is done differently because what happens, you start procuring from the source. So you'd probably, your buyers are in China, you bring in large, you buy maybe 50,000 per container. You can have that discussion from a price point. On the local level, unless you form some sort of a contractors organization, master builders, some kind that can lobby on your behalf. So we are accustomed to being fragmented in St. Lucia. I think the time has come for us to come together as a unit. Contractors, because of the way that they evolve in our society, they came from farmers, laborers, or somebody, apprentices, and became contractors. So the professionals who know how to structure things should probably lead that charge and make a presentation before government. Otherwise, it will continue. But in everything, you normally go through a cycle. It will go and then eventually get a level playing field. Because if the prices continue to escalate and no one can buy, then the suppliers now will have an abundance of stock on their hand. It's not moving. Now, one thing I've learned, dead stock, you can have $1 million sitting in your warehouse. It's not beneficial to you because you cannot move that stock. You cannot make a profit on it. It's just there. You have it on the books. And they need to turn over for them to generate a profit and to keep expanding their business. So at some point in time, we need to have that discussion. But for now, maybe one of the things that could happen, if the contractors, I don't know if they have a small organization, they can start doing their own source of procurement, start procuring in bulk, and then distribute almost like a cooperative. You smile, but that's one of the ways to go to beat such a thing. And then they'll take you seriously because they need you. So as far as I'm concerned, the fuel prices, inflation, it's real, and it's going to impact the cost of construction. So another way of looking at it again is your method statements. How do you go about carrying out a particular task? You have to eliminate waste from every process within the construction sector. You may either materials is one component of it, but maybe mechanization, all these other things. You have to eliminate waste and make yourself more efficient. That's what I can see on that. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Winsbert. And I mean, toward that point as well, would that war and a lot of these extraneous circumstances be considered a form of force majeure? I mean, it's circumstances basically out of your control, so maybe that can be used as an argument, with within your territory is force majeure, but outside of it, no. But with globalization, and I mean, it's one world. We import from everywhere in the world now. So.
So perhaps people like yourself, architects, that consider, do we have sufficient material? Some of the material that are on island can be utilized to create buildings. That's another thing we are thinking. Before we had so many buildings, gentlemen talk about his grandfather. Make sure they went into the forest and cut the trees and put it to dry.
Yeah, let's be careful with that. Huh?
No, not careful. We should go on that.
Yeah. No, well, that's the thing. Yeah, if we go in that route, it has to be an overall plan where we have proper sustainable forests and that sort of thing. I mean, building locally procured building material is difficult to come by. Yeah, stone and these sort of things. But even that, you need, if you have projects that require large quantities, it's difficult to get it. So if we go in along the line of pushing for locally procured materials, and even LEED and these things give you a lot of points for that sort of stuff, but it's difficult for regions like ours unless we put things in place where we're going to have Ministry of Forestry and these sort of things taking the charge and making sure that we actually have forestry, some good reforestation going on.
Some things have been said to
out of their region.
Yeah.
The whole will have gone into now. Everybody's protecting themselves first.
Mhm.
So we have to start thinking outside the box to see what do we have that we can utilize to give us structures that can withstand the elements that we are most at risk of, hurricanes, earthquakes, and that can provide us with sufficient to meet our domestic demand. And we have to recognize that what we used to get, the world has changed. A lot of people are not recognizing the world has changed. A lot of things that we used to get, it is no longer, it will take us another 10 or maybe 30 years to get back to that. We have to adapt in order to, meet those shortfalls.
Yeah. So, I mean, I agree with you that we need to start to think about about using a lot more local material, but I think local, because of our size, has to sort of be our region. It has to be the Caribbean community, St. Lucia on its own can't produce all the materials we have, but among us, within the Caribbean, we have enough to not only produce building materials, to produce foodstuffs, to produce everything. So I think as a region, we can possibly do that. We can start looking at protecting ourselves from the impact of the outside world, but each island cannot do it on their own. All right. I don't know if we have any more questions. I don't see any more online. I think we've had a pretty good day. It's been a pretty long day, but I thank you all for coming out. The Institute will be pushing forward with meetings with the Engineers Association, the Quantity Surveyors Association, etc. We, as Winsbert said, we really need to start working together as the construction community. And I think that the contractors need to pull together and start to lobby for some sort of licensing or something, because the lack of it is really affecting you. All right. It's easy for someone to get a quote from you and then take it to some small man down the road and tell him, well, this is what fella going to charge me. Do it for me for less. All right. Now he can do it because there's no need for him to register. He doesn't even need to have any education. All right. So, but we definitely need a level of quality and what's the word I'm looking for? Basically, you need a certain standard at which someone should be able to start off as a contractor. All right. You can't just have someone watching some YouTube videos and then say he's going to install tiles for someone. All right. And then after that, he decides, okay, I can render walls now because I saw something else. And then after that, he decides, well, boy, I'm just going to build a whole house. And that happens. All right. That's normal. So I think among you, I know that there's always a lot of infighting. There's infighting in all of the professions and all of the associations. But all you need honestly is about 5 to 10 committed people, and you can get it going. All right. So I want to thank you all for coming out. Remember, our Domus representative is on island. Well, I don't want to say our Domus representative. The Domus representative is on island. All right. So any of you guys who want to meet with him during the week, I think he's here for another week or something. All right. I want to thank Domus for partnering with us. I want to thank the ministries. I don't think they had sent any representatives, but the Ministry of Infrastructure and the Ministry of Housing had partnered with us for this. They took care of the venue and the refreshments for the event. So I just want to thank them and you for coming out, and they look forward to what we'll do next. All right. Take care, guys.